Today, we have the Arab-Israeli conflict. What is the Arab-Israeli conflict? The conflict is over land. It's over the land in the eastern Mediterranean, which we call the Levant. The Levant is present-day Israel, and Lebanon to the north, and Jordan to the east. Who owns this land? Well, the Canaanites had the land in 10,000 BC. And later, God called Abraham, the father of the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, in Ur of the Chaldees, which is over here a little bit to the east in southern-day Iraq, and called him to this land, which he's going to show them, and which he's going to give him, and which he's going to make his offspring like the sand at the seashore, that numerous, and there will be tremendous blessing. So Abraham came here. He occupied the land, but he didn't stay very long because the brothers ran out of food. They sold their brother into slavery, and that was 2000 BC when Abraham came. In about 1800, the brothers had to go to Egypt to buy some food because it was a drought in the land, and they ran into their brother Joseph. You know the story. Consequently, the Israelites were numerous at that time, a few thousand maybe, but they got to Egypt and they settled there in the land of Goshen in the Nile Valley near just north of Cairo. And after 400 years, they found themselves to be slaves, and Moses had to lead them out of slavery through the Sinai back into the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua and Caleb. You know the story. And so whose land is it? Then the Israelis, which are called the Israelites at that time, they're called Israelis after the creation of the Jewish state in 1948, created the Jewish state, which they called Israel. They divided themselves, first of all, they wanted the kings. They first had the judges, and then they had the kings. The kings started about 1000 BC with Saul, David, and Solomon. After Solomon, they split to the northern kingdom of 10 tribes called Judah, called Israel, and the southern 2 tribes called Judah. They were warring with each other, unfortunately, because they were not a common denominator, and so their neighbors could control them easily and quickly. And so what happened is the northern tribes didn't follow after the war. They got carried off to captivity in around 750 by Assyria, and the southern tribes didn't follow much either, so they got carried off in captivity to Babylon, approximately 550, 580 BC. And in the south, Babylon is in the southern Iraq, and Assyria is in northern Iraq, what today is Iraq. And so they lasted for 50 to 100 years, and then they were allowed to return, thanks to the Persians, and which is present-day Iran. And so they came back, and they were under the leadership or control of first Alexander the Great, then the Ptolemies, and then the Romans. And that takes us from about 400 BC up until about 100 AD. And when Jesus comes on the scene, he's under the control politically of the Romans, but the government will be on his shoulders. So who owns the land? It really wasn't a Jewish state. And after that series of wars, the Jews were eradicated by the Romans in 70 AD. And that's my story about Masada that you see on the list of videos as well. I'm in the red shirt. And that was kind of the Custer's last stand, and then they were distributed and scattered around the world. Who owns the land? Well, the local population continued to occupy the territory, and through the years, the Philistines became known as the Palestinians, and they controlled the territory, but they had angry neighbors all around them. And so it really wasn't the Jewish state until the Western powers were able to control and subdue the Ottomans, who controlled the territory between 1550 and 1918. And they were settled up here in the north, in Constantinople and Turkey. When the Ottomans lost, then France came in and controlled Jordan and Syria. They set up a protectorate in the north, and in the south, Israel or Palestine, and Jordan or the Transjordan was set up by the British as protectorates, and it was maintained at that point until 1945, at the end of World War II. At that point, the argument was the Jews put up with all of this Holocaust, therefore they should be allowed to have their homeland back. The question is, was it theirs? They hadn't really owned the place until the last king was conquered about 400 BC. Other people had owned it. They were just the occupiers of it. They hadn't really occupied it for almost 2,000 years. But the powers that be established the Zionist state and allowed it to occur. There was a short war, 1948, and the Jews now set foot back on this land called Palestine, which they declared to be Israel. And this is the territory that they controlled in 1948. The green part. They didn't control Gaza, they didn't control the West Bank, and they didn't control the northern Galilean highlands. But they wanted those territories, and there was an uneasy peace that entire time, where the Palestinian Muslims, by this time, were not so easy neighbors with the Jews who wanted the land back and wanted the control of the economy. In 1947, they invaded with the help of the West, and they took over the West Bank of the Jordan River, which includes East Jerusalem. They took over the Golan Heights in the north from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan. They took over the Sinai from Egypt. Now, these were the territories that were contested and the Jews took. But in 1983, they gave the Sinai back to Egypt. At that point, Jimmy Carter shook hands with Menachem Begin, representing Israel, and Anwar Sadat at Camp David. I was there, filming this, okay? I was just a small youngster at that time, okay? And when Sadat got back to Egypt that he had firm control over as a unenlightened king, despot, whatever, dictator, he was assassinated by a hardliner, the Muslim Brotherhood, who said, nobody shakes hands with Israel, they're our arch enemies. Okay, so that occurred. In any case, at the same time, Egypt got Sinai back. Syria wants the Golan Heights back, but Syria is afraid that Israel's afraid that Syria will invade them. Russia's been supporting Syria's Assad regime, even though Assad has been gassing his people with the sarin gas. And now we find out in just the last week that troops from Iran are in supporting Assad's government against the rebels and against the West. America is a little bit hesitant to go in because we helped in Iraq, didn't seem to work. The Sunnis and the Shias are after each other's throat, civil war like never before. We helped in Iran, we can't control the Taliban, we're getting out of there as well. We helped in Egypt, but the Muslim Brotherhood were toppled by the local infighters who want control of the government back because the Muslim Brotherhood was going back to a very staunch way of orthodoxy for Islam, and the people didn't want to live under that. So the question is, when the Arab Spring comes, as it has throughout the Middle East, what does it mean? It means that the old military regimes and the old unenlightened kings who were siphoning off the economy for themselves are now gone, thank goodness, but the real root of the problem are the different sects of Islam that are trying to control the territory, the Shias, the Sunnis, the Druze, the Kurds, and even the Maronites at some point in Lebanon. So nothing is settled, and this explains the rapid recent explosion of geopolitical activity in the Middle East over the last 2 years. Now what about the West Bank? This is the West Bank right here, and it's a large version over here. Okay, the West Bank is the territory that's controlled by Israel, but the Palestinians claim it, and a lot of them live there. And so, the Palestinians want the land back. Israel's not giving it back because East Jerusalem is the capital of both countries. And in fact, when in the early days, Muhammad came to the temple area, as I described on the other videos, and he set up this as a holy place, and they built the Mosque of Omar there where the temple area used to be, so it's hotly contested. The problem is that these red areas are the areas that show controlled by the Palestinians. The yellow areas are the areas controlled by Israel, and Israel is continuing to build West Bank housing for new immigrants, people that are coming in from Russia, people that are coming in from Latin America, people that are coming in from America, want to live in Israel. That was their goal all of their life, to go back to Israel, who owns the land. Israel now owns the land. They're not going to give up the West Bank contested territory. The Palestinians will not stop shooting. What about the Gaza? The Gaza was never really part of Hebrew Israel. You see, the Philistines were down there. They always controlled the territory. They were immigrants from the island of Crete in 2500 BC, and they brought with them metallurgy, so they could make iron spears for Goliath and chariots. The Israelites did not have that kind of technology. David beat up on Goliath. He was from the Gaza. Samson enjoyed Delilah. She was from the Gaza. These were Palestinian peoples that Israel had some interaction with, but never controlled that territory. In fact, they were their arch enemies all the way back to the thousands of BC, and they still are. So the Gaza has not been controlled. In fact, Israel controls the going in and going out of the Gaza, and has not allowed these people to immigrate or to actually work in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, or Haifa, or other places of employment. Consequently, the Hamas, the more warring faction of the Palestinian group, is shooting rockets out of the Gaza onto Israel. So when our tour buses come in this area, we have to be very careful, but we are. We haven't been hit yet. And the continuation of the conflict goes on. The Golan Heights won't be given back to Syria. The Gaza Strip will not be will not be taken over by Israel. But the big question is, what about the West Bank? It will not be returned to the Palestinians. The Palestinians will not give up until they get it. So no matter how many good ideals are coming forth in the settlement of the Middle East, there will be no settlement because we are at loggerheads over the land. The Israelis lost the land, the Israelites lost the land to the Babylonians, and to the Assyrians, and then to the Romans, and to the Greeks. Didn't have it for 1,500 years after that, and now they've got it back in 1940. Will not give it up ever again, okay? And the Palestinians won't give it up either. They not only want the land back, the Jews are building as many settlements as they can, because occupation of the land, they say, is 9/10 of the law against the UN resolutions to stop building. But there are also the questions of the refugees. Now what about Iran? Well, Iran is right over here on this map, the old land of Persia, and they said, we will wipe Israel off the map. We'll wipe it off the map. So they're building nuclear capability. The West says it's nuclear bombs. Iran says, oh no, it's just nuclear energy. Even though we have 1/3 of the world's supply of oil and gas, enough for our people for 1,000 years, we're going to make nuclear energy, so nobody can really believe that. And Israel's afraid that they will take a nuclear strike and try to wipe Israel off the map. And right now, the Ayatollahs in Iran and the theocracy of this country, which means God ruling through a cleric to control the people, is trying to come up with a scheme to buy time to develop more nuclear weaponry or whatever they're actually developing at the expense of Israel and the West, and have now allowed inspectors to come in. The developments are so far underground that if Israel does make a strike, which could happen at any time, it's so far underground it's probably not going to be completely successful. And then the Obama administration, or whatever administration, is going to be called on the carpet. Who do you support? Well, we've been supporting Israel since 1948. How do you think they got the military to defeat all of their supplies, to defeat all of their opponents and all of their neighbors? They got it from Miramar to every air station manager, all of those planes, and all the other weaponry. And of course, Iraq got the weaponry from America. Saudi Arabia continues to get the weaponry from America. Syria and Iran get the weaponry from Russia. And it's like the old Cold War continuing to be played out here with these client states in the Middle East. It will be very interesting to see what happens. In the meantime, we need to get there and see these historic and biblical places before they're gone.